Good evening, everybody. As I stated, my name is Catren. My day job, as I like to joke, is Chief of Police of this fine city. And I think Brian's talk was outstanding because it's one of those jobs where you really do get to combine passion and purpose. And some of us do get that lucky where you get to do exactly what you love every single day for going on 24 years for me. I'm here tonight to talk to you about leadership. And knowing that I was coming to talk to the future business leaders of America, I think this is an important topic. Because every day in the news, we see these failures of leadership. You know, what started the Me Too movement? Those are people in leadership positions who misuse those positions, and because of a lack of leadership, a lack of ethical leadership, got themselves into some very big trouble. So, I didn't get the clicker. Grab that. Thanks so much. So, always, when you're talking about something, you want to start with, well, what is it? So my idea is to talk to you about what, why, and how. So what is leadership? Why is it so important? And how do you do it? So the first thing, you go through life and you go through business school, which I went to in a master's program, and you get to the point where you've probably seen well over 100 to 200 definitions of leadership. None of them seem to really capture it for me. To me, leadership is, who in here can define love? Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like defining love. It's something that's very, very difficult to really put into words about what it is, but when you see it, you know it, right? Or when you feel it for love, you know it. And that's how I think of leadership. I do like John Maxwell's quote here, that he sees a leader as one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Because I think that, in essence, shows what you do. So that, that's kind of how you put the rubber to the road. But what is it? To me, leadership is really about a relationship, right? There's many relationships in leadership. The first one, of course, is you have the relationship between the leader and the followers. And those relationships change all the time, especially in my environment in policing. The leader on a call might be our brand new patrol officer until somebody else gets there. But when the community sees him in a moment of crisis, him or her, then they're going to identify the officer as the leader automatically. And that creates a relationship between those two people. What's that relationship based on? In my opinion, it's trust and credibility. Because if you don't have somebody's trust, you're not going to be able to lead them. Who here wants to follow somebody to whom you just think, well, that person doesn't have any ethical behavior that I would attribute to myself, so I don't want to trust them? That's most of us. Credibility, do they really know what they're doing? Right? I mean, you could have somebody, hey, my best friend, and he has no clue about taking a space shuttle somewhere, right? But you're not going to jump in a space shuttle with that person, right? Because they're not credible. They haven't earned their credibility so that you know what they're doing. So when you have that relationship and there is trust and there is that credibility, so you believe in the person and you believe they know what you're doing, that creates that relationship and it kind of moves forward. So when I talked about when you see it, some of the big names here to me, and this is all just from my perspective, you think of people like Martin Luther King. He didn't wake up one day probably and say, you know what, I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be the leader of the civil rights movement in the United States of America and make monumental change for millions and millions of people. I doubt he woke up and said that, right? He had a dream, and that was his way of telling people about how he wanted to lead in that capacity. Or somebody like Gandhi. He was somebody who came, he got educated, but he didn't go into that type of field. He decided he wanted to lead a movement against the colonialism in his country, and he did that through peaceful means. You think of people like Abraham Lincoln, a great leader, somebody who said, no, I'm not going to let this fledgling brand new country fall apart, and he took major risks to make sure that didn't happen. Or Susan B. Anthony, she didn't wake up one day saying, you know what, I believe in equal rights, everybody else should, and I'm going to go do that, and that's going to be my life's work. These people find themselves in these circumstances, and they choose to be a leader, which I think is really important, because it is a choice. Because leadership, let me go on to why it's important. Why is leadership important? Because without it, there's a vacuum, right? If there's no leader, you just sit there in a circle. Now, I see a lot of high school students in here, so how many of you have been assigned that awesome task when your instructor says, hey, I've got a group project for you, right? Does fear run down your spine at that point? It did for me in high school, college, and those kinds of environments because I knew exactly what would happen. You'd be assigned to some group by some method, whether random or chosen, and you would all sit there and look at each other. And when it got up to divvying up assignments, everybody seemed to be too busy doing something else, right? Nobody steps up and says, you know what, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. I want your input, but we're going to make this happen as a team, right? Does that happen very often? Maybe it does now. It sure didn't when I was in school. That was a million years ago, but it never happened. So you've seen it yourselves of, that leadership vacuum. It happens all over. It happens in companies. It's happened on United States naval carriers where these things get in accidents. And they find out every time when you trace back these major accidents or these major failures, it always comes back to a lack of leadership. So without leadership, there's just this vacuum. And then there's no trust. And the bottom line is nothing gets done. The whole object of leadership, for the most part, is to achieve goals, right? If you're working for a company, for example, or you're working in the police department, we set goals. And we say, hey, we want to reduce crime by 5% this year. Or we want to reduce injury collisions by 6% this year. We set these goals every single year. And if you don't have somebody that wants to step up and lead and take that project on, you're not going to achieve those goals. And that's, in essence, what leadership is about. Like I mentioned Martin Luther King. He wanted to change an entire system. He wanted to change the minds of people in the most powerful country on earth. That's monumental. Most leadership tasks, luckily for us, aren't that monumental because most of us, myself included, aren't going to be the next Martin Luther King Jr., right? That's a very high standard. But the idea is the same, that somebody has to step up, somebody has to get things done, right? Eventually in these groups that I talked about, the group work assigned by your teacher, the big nightmare, somebody typically does stand up, right? And somebody finally, after everybody stares at each other for 15 or 20 minutes, somebody in there cares enough, and it's probably you people in this room, somebody says, you know what, I need an A on this project, or I want an A on this project, so someone says, you know what, this is going to get done, so I guess I'm the leader. Most people just don't wake up one day and decide to be the leader. Circumstances put you in that position. Or you see inequity, or you see something that you think you can impact, and you decide, you make a conscious choice to be the leader. And what does that mean? That means sacrifice. You are sacrificing a great deal of your time, your effort, your energy, because leadership is work. And people don't like to tell you that. When you look up leadership in a book, it's not going to say it's really hard work. But it is. But people need to do that. So now how? And this is a very brief tutorial on my opinion on how you become a leader effectively. The first thing is you've got to seek out opportunities. Right? There are so many opportunities to stand up and lead because everywhere you look, you see these vacuums, whether it be in that group project, whether it be in the clubs that you're involved in, whether it be on a sports team. Opportunities exist, or if you see something in the community that you don't like, what's to stop you from leading change to make something different, to make something better? Nothing. You have to seek those opportunities out because they don't just typically fall in your lap. It happens every once in a while. Somebody gets lucky, or air quotes lucky, because it is a lot of work. But always look for things out there to where you can start to hone these skills, because leadership isn't something that you're born with. It's something you have to work at all the time if you want to do it well. Right? There have been leaders in history who have had massive influence over a lot of people, but have done it very in an evil manner. You think of Adolf Hitler. Every time you look up leadership, they'll talk about how he was such a great leader. Well, he was able to influence a lot of people to do a lot of evil things, but I don't know if that makes him necessarily a great leader in my mind. But think about that. Look for those opportunities. And it took other leaders to stand up and stop that, right? So from Dwight D. Eisenhower to Harry Truman to Winston Churchill, other people stood up to that type of evil and did the hard work, put in the sacrificed their own time, effort, energy, the lives of many people in their countries to make that a different thing, to turn the tide in that war. So it's very important. We spoke about this a little bit earlier, about developing trust and credibility. Well, how do you do that? How do you develop trust with somebody? Consistency, right? We trust people who are consistent. The way typically parents treat their children. It should be consistent, right? Because you have to know what to expect. And that helps develop trust, so that if you come home in my house with a C on your report card, my kids know what that's going to do, right? They know out of my consistency, out of our expectations, they know that's not going to be a great situation, right? So they trust in the fact that if they bring home a C, there's going to be a problem, and there will be. So that helps to develop that. So in a more positive sense for leadership purposes, when you get into a role, in a job, for example, and you're in a leadership position, when people come to you, you have to listen to them. Because I said earlier, it's about that relationship. You don't trust people who don't give you the time of day, right? It takes time. It takes time and effort and a lot of repetition to build trust. But it's the most important component in my mind. And then credibility. You have to have the know-how for whatever the situation is. So in my job as a police chief, I can have all the trust of everybody in the department, but if I came in from IBM, say I worked at IBM for a whole career and I came to be a police chief in Redlands, do you think I'd have the credibility to get that job done in an effective manner? No, because I wouldn't know the first thing about running a police department. I would never have put handcuffs on somebody. I never would have talked to a 4-year-old victim of violence. Those things help build that credibility, your know-how in the job, and the credibility is what you need to develop that trust, that relationship with somebody. So this third one is probably my favorite. Don't try to fit in. And I know I'm talking to largely a group of high school students, and high school is so much of trying to fit in. But especially when you get outside of this realm, and even as much as you can inside this realm, don't try to fit in, right? It's the whole idea of, there's all kinds of sheep, but there's very few sheepdogs, right? So do you want to be the sheep, or do you want to be the sheepdog? And that's kind of the way I see this. You don't want to necessarily just fit in with everybody. You want to stand out, and it becomes very important. You'll start doing applications for college. You'll start doing interviews for scholarships. You don't want to look like every other person that rolled in that day. You want to stand out. And by being a leader, and by showing that in your resume and in your talking points in these venues, that's going to show people that you're not like everybody else, that you do have leadership potential, because I guarantee you, everybody out there is looking for the next leader. When I'm hiring police officers, entry-level police officers, or entry-level community service officers, or entry-level dispatchers, I don't look for what they are today. I don't look for how good a police officer or a dispatcher they might be in 2 years. I'm looking at people, hey, which one of these people might be the next police chief? Which one might be the next sergeant? Might be the next lieutenant? Might be the next dispatch supervisor? You're always searching for that leadership potential in people, so show them you have it. And I think that will go a long way. Take risks. We talked a little bit about that earlier, and taking risks is important, because if you don't take risks, you don't grow. You can never grow in your comfort zone. And I know it's hard to get outside of it, because they don't call it a comfort zone for nothing, right? It's called that because that's what we like. When you wake up in your cozy warm bed every morning, that's your comfort zone, right? Who wants to jump out of it? Not me either. No, that's crazy. But life is like that. Your experience in your job, your experience in college will be like that. So you have to step outside of what's comfortable, because if you don't, you'll never find things. And from a personal perspective, I never planned on being a police officer. And that's very unusual in this business. Almost everybody else I work with, they tell me a story about their 5th birthday, and it always ends with, and that's when I decided I want to be a police officer. Who does that? So it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But it's very, very consistent in our industry. I think police, fire, that's very, very common. I'm kind of the outlier. So it's really funny how that works. And you find out that you do take risks, and what happened with me is I came to Redlands, and I took a risk from a job that I had that was a good job, but there was a new job here in Redlands that it was a chance to start up something brand new called crime analysis, and I'd get to work with cool software and figure out where and when crime was happening, and I thought, you know what, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm going to give that a shot so I can finish my college degree and then go get a real job. 24 years later now, here I am. Eventually I decided I did want to be a police officer. I went in and I talked to the chief, And when we talk about taking risks, I went into my kind of off-the-cuff interview with the then Chief of Police, Lou Nelson, and so I told him, you know, Chief, I think I want to be a police officer. And he says, oh gosh, you know what, I knew this was going to happen. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, how did you know this was going to happen? Because I decided this about 8 minutes ago. But he tells me, I knew this was going to happen. And so we start talking, and he says, well, you know, where do you see yourself going in your career? And I told him, I see myself sitting at your desk eventually. And he remembers that to this day. So he kind of is taken back a little bit, but he chuckles, and he thought I was kidding. And oddly enough, we are still in the same building, same office, and I'm sitting in the same place. So it can happen that way. You take risks. You tell people, hey, I have big dreams. And a lot of times they'll give you the opportunity to fulfill those dreams. So always remember that. The last one here, become a lifelong learner. You know, it's so easy to always look for the end goal, right? You start high school, and then what are you thinking about next? Graduation, right? You know, it cracks me up because from the very first days of high school, when you have your rallies, you start really getting into that idea of, hey, in 4 years, that's my number, right? That's the year that I'm getting out of this place. That's when I get to stop. Well, then you get closer and closer, and you realize, well, that's not when I stop. That's just the end of this, and then that's when I start college. But gosh, 4 years after that, oh, thank goodness, because then I can finally stop. And then you find out, well, shoot, every single person walking the streets today has a bachelor's degree. And if I want to do these things like stand out, not fit in, I might need to get more education. Well, I'm going to do 2 years for a master's, or 3 years for a JD, or I'm going to put in the full 7 and go for a PhD. It never stops. And whether it's formal education or otherwise, you always have to keep going. There's so much more out there. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself, because that's where you find opportunity. That's where you start to think outside the box. That's where you start to truly lead. When you start looking outside of your comfort zone and you look for opportunities out in the vast array of space and time, you start looking for different things out there that people think you're crazy when you bring them up, but that's what. A good example in our department is we started using these GPS trackers. When the GPS technology got to a point where it was very small, they were typically only used in banks, and they had a very tiny little market share. This company we went to, real tiny market share, and we said, hey, we want to rip the guts out of a laptop and put your tracker in it, and then put it in the car and see if people will steal it, and then we can find them. And it's turned into this massive program now, and we do it for cars, bicycles, packages, all kinds of different things. But it just started here in Redlands. We were the first department to do it, and we've gotten a lot of press about it because it was an innovation that had somebody not stood up and said, hey, you know what, let's do this. And then have the leadership to say, we'll give it a try, right? It's about taking risks. It costs money. Sometimes we lose them. They're $425 a piece. And in our environment, you know, that's not very fun when you lose money like that. But you take some risks, you get some good arrests out of it, you get a great program that truly makes the community a safer place. So kind of to sum it up, my big point here tonight is to at least try to get you interested in the idea of leadership, to get you to think about being that person that's going to stand up, take control of situations, and put yourself out there, to put in the work, to put in the sacrifice, to put in the time, to develop everybody else that's with you, because that's a huge part of leadership, is to develop the next generation. That's a big part of my job now, is to find my replacement, right? I just got this job 6 months ago, but you already started thinking about who's going to be next, and giving them opportunity so that they can fill those shoes when they become available. So my thing here today is to challenge you to be that person, to be the ones, to be the, you know, who knows, the next MLK or Gandhi or Abe Lincoln could be sitting in this room. We don't know. It could be any of you, but when you see the opportunity, seize it, and the world could be a much better place for it. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions.